Good morning. Thank you very much, Chair.
Yeah,
members. All right, I'll be brief. Executive management of corporations have a fiduciary duty to maximize shareholder value. When executives engage in ESG practices, they are neglecting their fiduciary responsibilities in pursuit of what is almost always a left-wing agenda that has nothing to do with maximizing shareholder value, and worse, it often diminishes it. As the Heritage Foundation recently explained, ESG policies are a thinly veiled attempt to radically transform corporations into social justice warriors and exclude from the system of global finance, capital, any company or even individual who doesn't agree with the prevailing environmental or social ideology, effectively functioning like a social credit score. As a result, capital is now being diverted to causes and purposes that its investors never intended to support. ESG works to mandate ideological considerations in investments across the board, fundamentally changing the free market as we know it. HB 872 is an incredibly simple bill aimed at protecting shareholders in derivative proceedings where they believe that management has been engaged in ESG in violation of their fiduciary duty. All it does is shift the burden of proof to the company in these proceedings to demonstrate their action or their inaction was, in fact, in the best interest of the company. That's it.
Thank you, Representative Harrison. I think you've got a few questions. Start with Vice Chair Johnson.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So you want to over-regulate out of the state of Texas for the corporate practice of fiduciary duty for their shareholders?
I said nothing to that effect.
Yeah, you did, actually.
No, I didn't.
So
you just used the word over-regulate.
Yes, over-regulate. You are placing the state of
a-
Texas into the boardrooms of every corporation.
The state of Texas is already in the boardrooms, to the extent that the state of Texas already requires a fiduciary duty of the management of corporations.
So you say
no.
ESG. What does ESG stand for?
And so there are multiple bills and
What does
multiple other
ESG
states
stay
that have
for?
definitions. I would talk about it in terms of a non-pecuniary perspective.
What does ESG mean? In
What
your
does- what
mind,
does
you're
it
the one
mean?
bringing the legislation. What does
I am.
ESG mean? Because you're the one
need
that
to-
came in here and dropped that bomb and said, hey, ESG corporations, they're not protecting their shareholders.
Well, I think you know
What
very
does
well,
ESG
as
mean?
well as anybody, what the letters stand for.
No, you tell me. What does it
Environmental,
mean?
social governance.
Environmental.
And that is
Okay.
pushing. Yeah.
So,
Hang on. Vice Chair Johnson asked a question. Representative Harrison answered.
I did.
so
Okay.
environmental. So if a corporation wants to make a decision to go into business
Yeah.
to attract a market that has a different environmental view from you, you want to dictate their free market practice in Texas. And I'm just
Wrong.
going to let you know.
That's not correct. It's also not a question, by the way.
Really?
It's not a question.
Mr. Harrison, my question is, you spend all of your time at this mic saying performative statements and not actually trying to affect public policy. So let me tell you this is my statement. Do you understand that as a Democrat in the state of Texas, that I am doing more to protect the free market and interest of corporations than the social agenda of which you are imposing on business? So the Texas miracle is going to continue to work because of people like me that try to stop your performative political extremism from impacting Texas businesses. So my question is, I hope you enjoy it.
Those were two statements,
Representative Dyson,
but two
do you have
statements.
questions?
I do. So Representative Harrison, this shifts the burden of proof right to the corporation
Yeah,
in this instance.
yeah, that's right.
Right now, the burden of proof, if I got this right, is comprised of the burden of production, burden of persuasion. So your bill would shift both of those over, right? Are you familiar with that?
Sure.
Burden
I'm
of
not sure.
production, you don't know what that is? Okay, so burden of production is
No,
the burden to produce actual evidence, and then you have also a burden to persuade the trier of fact.
Yeah, and
that you're
and the
correct.
bill, but to be very clear, Representative, the bill does nothing to change what is or is not considered burden of proof in any legal proceeding in the state of Texas.
Well, it does change it, right? It shifts it.
No, what I'm saying is this bill doesn't change what is the burden of proof. So the definition of burden of proof is not materially affected or immaterially affected by this.
Well, I think it is, because so when we deal with breach of fiduciary duty, and I think you brought that up as
I
one
don't
of the
think you're
claims.
understanding my response.
I do understand your response. I don't think you understand your bill and what it's
do
doing.
understand my
That's
bill.
what I'm actually concerned about.
It shifts
I'm
the
not
burden of
actually
proof.
hostile
It
to
shifts-
you.
Representative Harrison, you've got to let him ask the question, and then you answer. We're gonna go back and forth.
Thank you.
Representative Dyson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a question. I'm trying to understand this bill.
Yeah.
What I'm concerned about is you don't understand the repercussions of this bill.
You've said that
I'm
twice,
not-
and I'm trying to respond to that, which
Representative
is false.
Harrison, seriously, just let him ask the question, and he'll be quiet, and then you answer. And then you'll be quiet, and he'll ask another question. Representative Dyson.
Was your intent to shift the burden of production and burden of persuasion from the corporation to the shareholder in cases involving ESG?
The bill, and I will read it, the burden of proof in the proceedings that the bill articulates in the first sentence is shifted to the corporation. I am not changing the term, I'm not changing the definition, I'm not changing the intent, I'm not changing the meaning of the three words burden of proof. That would be a totally unrelated matter.
Okay, and this is where I think that there's a disconnect. So burden of proof is usually defined not in statute, but actually in common law in a lot of different cases that we have going back to the 80s. So when we discuss fiduciary duties, for example, there is a shifting sometimes of the burden of persuasion, and sometimes it's a shifting of the burden of production and the burden of persuasion. So I'm just trying to understand from your bill,
Yeah.
are you intending to say that the corporation now must produce all the evidence to show that to disprove whatever the allegation is,
And
and,
with-
also
yeah.
persuade the trier of fact?
And with all due respect, I think that question would be most appropriately directed towards somebody who's trying to modify either statutory language or case law precedent on what is considered to be the burden of proof in the state of Texas. My bill doesn't change any of that.
Okay. You clearly just said that fiduciary duty claims, you brought that up when you were talking to Representative Johnson about it. I just told you there's two different aspects out there in common law right now when we deal with derivative proceedings, been involved in both of them, that sometimes you have a burden of persuasion shift, sometimes you have a burden of production. If you'd like to say, I'm not sure and I'd like to talk to you about it, that's fine, and I can move on to my next point. But I'm just trying to understand from you, do you understand if you are shifting both of those burdens, or are you just shifting one or the other? Because this is not a fiduciary duty claim from what I can tell, or is this based on fiduciary duty in ESG?
No. So again,
Okay.
I think we got, no, hang on. I'm not answering no in that way. I'm saying there were several assertions that you made at the beginning that I am disagreeing with explicitly. Do I have a problem shifting both? No, not at all. But I'm simply making the point that my bill doesn't change anything about what is or is not considered to be burden of proof in the state of Texas. Burden of proof exists. I'm shifting it. I am not modifying in any way, shape, or form what burden of proof is.
I understand that, and I'm not asking. Burden of proof is, again, made up of two different types.
I've already answered. I'm fine with them both shifting.
Okay, so you're fine with your bill shifting both. Okay, I just want to make sure that we're on the same page. Okay, now let's kind of go through, and you started reading through the language, right, of your bill, and it says that alleges an act or omission related to improper consideration of environmental, social, and governance criteria in the performance of the act of omission. So my understanding of ESG policies, I guess now the trend is to go away from, is DEI a part of ESG policies?
I suppose it could be, but I'm talking about things that are not in the best interest of the shareholder.
But
of maximizing
DEI,
shareholder value.
it probably is part under the social aspect of
It
ESG,
very-
I guess.
I think there are many examples where reasonable people could say yes, yeah, absolutely.
So what about complying with government regulations? That's probably under the governance part of the policy, right?
Well, again, I think
Or even
all,
under environment?
well, I mean, all corporations in all states are required to comply with state and federal statutory and regulatory requirements.
Right, so if they had the policy, but they had policy there, right? And say they had that, it would be part of an ESG policy technically, even though it's probably not called ESG, but it's focused on ESG issues, and that's kind of what your bill gets at, right? You don't have to, your bill does not require a corporation to specifically say, this is an ESG policy, therefore it's now subject to this burden shifting, right?
No.
It's more about if it's criteria that would fit under an ESG aspect, then it would apply to burden
Again,
shifting.
it's not saying that there's any action that just a per se commission of that action would be violative of what I'm talking about here. But because it says in the last sentence that the act or omission of an act was in the best interest of the corporation.
Right. No, I get that. And so a shareholder is going to come in and say, hey, this act or omission, so part of whatever your policy is, if you didn't consider this, then I can have a burden shifting if it's under ESG criteria, right?
If that was the reason they were doing it, not if they were trying to comply with statute, as your question was predicated on.
Well, no, it's not predicated. I'm just asking because regulatory thing. But yes, that's part of ESG policy, or it can be, especially if it's environmental when it comes to
I mean,
certain parts.
somebody could potentially construe that, but that's not what I'm talking about here.
Okay, but that's not what you're talking about, but it's kind of what's opened up here. And this is why I have this question for you. You know, I think you said, and I think it was a tweet about this bill, actually, that this ESG bill is to protect from the woke leftist agenda, right? Is that kind of accurate? Maybe paraphrase a little bit.
I support defeating the woke leftist agenda on all dimensions, yeah.
Only helps ESG supporting leftists, right? That's what your bill. You said this dishonest attempt to smear me, a cheap stunt that delays the bill, only helps ESG supporting leftists. So your point is that
to the extent that statutes or proposed statutes such as this bill that would be a great tool in the battle against leftist ESG, the likelihood of becoming finally a passed statute is diminished, then yeah, it would help that. That's correct.
So what we just talked about, though, you do realize, right? It's a tool for those leftists that you say have this agenda to actually use and now come after corporations that are doing the right thing and burden shift to them. So a climate activist shareholder, couldn't they come after a corporation here in Texas if your bill passes and says the corporation has to prove why they don't have an ESG policy, why they omitted this out of their ESG policy, or anything of that nature? You have just now caused a great corporation here in Texas to have to accept that burden of proof. Isn't that what your bill actually does?
No, I think that'd be a preposterous reading. But to the extent your concern is sincere and not just grandstanding, I'd be happy to work with you on language to make sure that the language is sufficiently narrowly tailored.
Oh, I can guarantee you I don't grandstand. I think it's a little different from what you do. But I do want to know that because I care deeply about protecting the businesses that are coming here to Texas.
So do I.
We have a kind of, our agenda here in Texas has been to attract businesses. And when I see a bill like this, where either you don't understand what the repercussion of your bill is,
Which is not true.
or maybe you do have that intention that allow that and create extra lawsuits that are in there. But the thing that is, right now, what we're seeing in Delaware is people are fleeing Delaware because of ESG issues. Those same climate activists that come in, they could turn around and use your bill to attack them. If you disagree, tell me how I'm wrong in what language that your bill does not allow.
Well, as I said, we're going through a committee process. I mean, yes, we're 4 months into the session here, but we're going through a process. And to the extent that you support the intent of the bill, which I mean, I don't know if that's an assumption, I have no idea. If you support the intent of the bill, which is to make it harder for shareholders to be defrauded by a management who is misallocating their capital in a suboptimal fashion to pursue social justice type causes, almost in many ways very similar to like social credit scoring. To the extent you share that goal, as I would certainly believe that you would as a Republican, I would be happy to work with you if you think that there are ways in which the language should be more appropriately tailored to accomplish that objective. I'd be happy to work with you about that.
Yeah, and I'm happy to talk to you about that.
Right.
I guess that my issue here is that I don't think you've actually thought through this bill and
false.
what the repercussions of this bill would be. And you've already done, and I'll use your words, some grandstanding on it, and it concerns me for that reason that you didn't already have this discussion with me or with anybody else to kind of discuss the details of your bill.
I am here telling you right now I'm happy to discuss it with you. And as everybody who's ever worked with me knows, I have an open door, open phone policy. So if you have any questions, you could have reached out as well.
Okay, so let's go to a different aspect of it.
Representative Harrison, can I ask, I've been chair of this committee now 4 sessions. I've heard hundreds of bills. I've never had a member actively on his cell phone while he's laying out a bill and answering questions from a fellow member.
Is there a question there?
Are you tweeting? Are you texting? He's trying to ask you questions.
I'm not
and engage
tweeting, but I thought
hang
we're
on, let me
supposed to be-
finish. Let me finish.
Okay.
He's trying to engage you in a serious discussion about this bill.
Yes.
And you're punting on his very serious questions.
That's
You're
false.
asking us, and you're I don't know what you're doing on your phone, but you're not paying attention to him.
I am paying
Every
attention.
time the camera goes back to him, I'm watching up here.
How would
You're
I know
on
the
your phone.
cameras? I'm not paying any attention to the cameras. You're paying attention to the cameras.
I'm paying attention to you,
you're
Representative
paying attention
Harrison.
to
I'm
the
asking
cameras.
you to please stay off your phone while you're answering questions from Representative Dyson.
I was actually looking up information related to the questions.
So you don't have, you have to look on your phone for answers to his questions?
No, that would be a preposterous thing.
I'm asking you with
I'm sorry,
respect.
are
With
we
respect, you're
supposed
in-
to keep our comments?
Representative Harrison, you are sitting and laying out your bill before my committee, okay? I am asking you to stay off your cell phone while you are sitting in front of my committee laying out your bill, answering questions from Representative Dyson or any other member up here.
Should I remind you about the comments you made about the need to maintain decorum in this proceedings?
Representative Harrison, when I think about decorum, I think about a member who's laying out a bill staying off his cell phone. If you can just stay off your cell phone for just a few more minutes
This is silly.
and answer questions from Representative Dyson
I have
and other members.
I have answered every question.
Representative Harrison, I'm asking you to stay off your cell phone
This is ridiculous.
while you do your bill layout. Representative Dyson.
All right, so kind of focusing again on this, let's take, for example, a real-life case that was filed in the Delaware Chancery Court. It was shareholder, putative class actions, a derivative suit against Meta, and the basis of the suit was that the corporation was focusing on corporate profits without considering social impact. In other words, they had omitted that part out of their ESG, and that was the basis of the lawsuit. Under your bill, do you think that that would shift the burden to Meta here to prove that they should have been considering the social impact and not just focused on profits?
Not as I understand the facts of that case, insofar as I understand them and how they may or may not be impacted by this. But again, to the extent that you have a concern about that, as I've said repeatedly, if you support the goal of giving the state of Texas every possible tool to combat ESG, which is, by the way, the official position of the government of the state of Texas, if you support that goal, I'd be happy to work with you offline about any potential emendations to the draft language that you might see fit.
Well, I'm just concerned because you just walk in here and you want to shift burdens, and that's my basic concern is when we start doing that and we start playing with who has burdens of proof when they're walking into a courtroom, I think we have to make sure that we fully understand the context here, and that was my concern with you, is that I do think that you have a lofty goal, which is to prevent kind of those activist investors that we've been talking about that bring shareholders, and you want to make it, for some reason, easier on shareholders. I do believe you have that intent. My question here really goes back to this wording in the statute. Did you think it all the way through? And that's my biggest concern here. And if I'm missing something, I'd love for you to tell me.
I'm not, well, I won't comment as to whether I think you're missing something or not. That's not germane. My intent, I think, is clear from the plain language reading of the bill. It was an intent to shift burden of proof. If you have thoughts on ways, again, to the extent to which you share the goal of combating ESG, a position that is consistent with, and in fact is the position of the state of Texas, I'd be happy to work with you on any potential emendations. I've said this many times, so I'd be happy to work with you on that.
Okay.
And that's true for any member of the committee.
Vice Chair Johnson. Vice Chair Johnson. You good? Members, are there other questions for Representative Harrison? All right. I actually do have a question because I want to, just for the record, to protect the integrity of this committee, Representative Harrison, I want to be very clear about what happened last week with the bill. You were not here, right, when I called your bill up, correct? And you
As everybody knows, I was voting in another committee.
No, I didn't know that at the time. And in fact, if you will, and if you want to pick up your cell phone right now,
You
I'll
just
give
told
you
me
permission
you just told me
to do
not
so.
to touch my cell phone.
Well, I'm
so
giving you permission to do so, Representative Harrison.
Which is it?
Well, for a
Which is it?
specific purpose, I'm giving you permission to do so. And if you would like to read our text message conversation from last week when I was sitting at the dais, let me finish. When I had called your bill up, you weren't here. I immediately let you know. And I said, if you would like for me to bring it back up that very afternoon, I'm happy to do so.
That's not true.
You can talk to the parliamentarian.
That is true. You did never told me in writing or in verbal or any other communications that you would bring it up. You sent me to go talk to the Barack Obama lawyer. Okay, that's what you told me in your text message. If you want to read it, you can see that.
Representative Harrison.
You never
I
ever hand. You never. That is you
Representative
asserted
Harrison.
something that is false. You never said you're happy to
I'm
bring
giving
it
you
back up.
permission to, I'm giving you permission to
giving you permission to
screenshot
read
that
it.
text exchange between you and me and post it.
And I'm giving you permission to do the same. You just asserted that you told me you would be happy to bring my bill back up. That is factually false.
Representative Harrison?
It's false. And
Well,
the
while we're on
the
the
text
record-
exchange would document that.
While we're on the record,
And while you're looking that up, I should remind you, as I'm sure you know, that your clerk, in writing to me the night before, said she would text us if my bill was coming up and I wasn't here. That never happened.
Representative Harrison, we went through the rest of the agenda. The other members had let us know. You were next in line in terms of
but
seniority.
your office told mine in writing
I am the
that I
chair
would
of
be
the, I
notified
am
if I was
chair of the
coming up,
committee, and on the
that did not
posting,
happen.
on the posting of the agenda, as we do every week, the agenda is at the order of bills is at the discretion of the chair. And if you read back through our text, okay, you said you were voting in committee. I said I was not aware of that. You were next in line in terms of seniority.
Mm-hmm.
You can talk to the parliamentarian about getting it back on the agenda if you'd like, or we can do it next week.
Correct. And
Your
you-
response was, since you apparently formally withdrew it, next week is fine. I just want the record to
Because
show.
you withdrew it.
Representative Harrison,
And
I
you
did.
never said you were going to bring it back up. You said I could go grovel to Hugh Brady. That's what your text says.
Representative Harrison,
Why
I
would
did-
I do that?
I did-
Only a fool would do that.
Representative Harrison,
That's what it says.
Michael, if we have the ability to turn off his mic, get ready, because I'm tired of you misleading the committee, the
I'm
public.
very used to having my mics cut off here.
Well, for good reason, Representative Harrison, because when you lie and you mislead and you deceive not only the fellow members of the House, but the people of Texas, you deserve to be called out on it, and your microphone deserves to be shut off. I never mentioned you, Brady, not once, not once. I said you can go talk to the parliamentarian.
Who is that?
And if you want, you don't know who the parliamentarian
The
is?
chief parliamentary officer of the House of Representatives is Hugh Brady. Hugh Brady is the chief
Excuse me,
parliamentary
Representative
officer of
Harrison.
the House of the State of Texas.
Representative Harrison?
Yeah.
And then we're going to be done with this and we're going to move on. Because there are
Great.
other members sitting behind you who are serious about their bills and witnesses who want to testify. And frankly, I'm just tired of the nonsense.
I'm here to try to
But-
fight ESG.
But
So,
for,
well, you
for
clearly
the
don't
record,
share this
Representative Harrison, for the record, I and the committee would have been happy to have you in front of our committee last week, and I expressed that to you.
You didn't have to withdraw my bill, Chairman. You
Representative
withdrew
Harrison,
it. You didn't have to withdraw it.
I did withdraw it because you were not
You
here, and I
didn't
told you
have
you
to
could go get.
withdraw it. I've never seen that happen since I got elected here.
Representative Harrison,
For
you
a member
could have.
voting in another committee, another public committee.
All right. I am Representative Flores.
Oh, I had a question, because
Okay.
I'm trying to understand
Is
this.
it about the bill, I hope?
It is.
I'd love to get back to talking about
It-
fighting ESG. in
It
Texas.
is. So if
Thank you.
if a corporation is founded on the premise of doing environmental good, or, you know, is very interested in changing the social impact of certain practices, and that's, it's in its founding, and shareholders buy into that idea and invest in that corporation. I'm just trying to understand how this works, because I'm not a corporate
Well, yeah, I
lawyer.
mean, the bill
So,
only-
so if
Okay.
somebody just buys some stock and becomes a shareholder, or gets enough stock so they can have standing to sue, they can bring an action if, say, they don't agree with the policies out of that corporation, or the intent of how it was started. They can bring a lawsuit now, and then it's going to be, the burden of proof is going to be on the corporation to prove that they are in fact following, you know, their mission statement and why they were started, and all their acts and activities are based on that premise. Is that
No,
correct?
it's a very fair, and I appreciate the respectful nature of the question. Thank you very much. I'm grateful to have some of those today. And I'd be happy to talk with you about that more offline. I would look up, although I've been prohibited from looking up on my phone, the actual definitions of who Texas statute currently allows to have standing in a derivative proceeding. As I heard your question, I'm not sure that particular shareholder would in fact have standing to bring a derivative action as a result of this bill, but I'd be happy to look into that and follow up with you offline. Yeah, you bet.
Oops.
The
Thank
chair
you.
will show Chairman Landgraf and Representative Gonzalez here. Members, any other questions for Representative Harrison? Seeing none, the chair will leave House Bill 872 pending at this. I'm sorry. Does anyone want to testify on, for, or against this bill? Seeing none, Chair Representative Harrison, would you like to close?
I close. Thank you, Chair.
Members, any questions for the bill's authors? Seeing none, the author is closed, and the chair will leave House Bill 872 pending at this time.